Chapter 421, Disaster Overhead. Sun, Sand, Sea. This scenery was made lively by people running about like dogs. Gufei was one of these men. Now that they were aware that Southern Lone Blade's 7th Squad had left the city, locating the boat was no longer their priority, and they instead resolved to directly look for the group itself. The land outside Linshui City was not as wide as those of other cities, as it was mostly surrounded by water. Largely comprised of the flat beach, the terrain was simple. This place had no particularly outstanding feature besides the bit of flora and fauna. However, these were at most small copses of woodland and could not be deemed as a forest. As such, they were able to have a rather wide line of sight. Gufei ran along the shore while looking around. They were essentially circling around Linshui City. After covering a distance, he finally spotted a group of players. This group had more than 7 players, though, so they were obviously not Southern Lone Blade Squad. However, these men, who were holding their weapons out while exuding a very telling killing intent, looked to be in a hurry as well. Catching sight of him as he saw them, 4 among them split off and came running toward him. "What are you doing here?" the 4 asked in a hostile manner the moment they got near him. "Nothing much, I'm just jogging," he replied nonchalantly. "Jogging?" These men were stunned. Life is all about exercising. He jogged on the spot as he said this, acting the part. He was a PE teacher in real life, after all. Gufei was beaming even as these men looked at him as if they had just met an idiot. They regarded him with unblinking eyes and seemed to hesitate over something. "Do you guys have business with me?" "If there's nothing else, I'm gonna continue with my jog," he said. The 4 did not respond as they were still pondering on what they should do. He smiled brightly once more and said goodbye before jogging past them. It was at that point when the 4 came to a decision and shouted, "Stop right there!" before pouncing on him. The rest of their group were still on the advance when the leader received a message. "God damn it! We got killed." "What?" The leader was nonplussed. "That guy killed us," the player repeated. Startled, the leader faced the direction where the 4 had been and spotted the mage in a black robe resuming his jog along the beach. His 4 men were nowhere to be seen. The leader could hardly believe his eyes. Because they were in a rush, he had randomly sent the 4 over to check things out when they spotted someone suspicious. Judging the man's answer to be sketchy and erring on the side of caution, he gave the order for the 4 to kill the mage. The 4 players were no slouches, so he was certain that they would have no problem dealing with a lone mage and did not even watch the ensuing scuffle, opting to continue leading his men on their way. Instead, however, in no less than 5 seconds that he had given the order, he received the message from the 4 about their deaths. This was entirely unbelievable. Even if the mage was an expert, it should still take him some time to kill 4 players, right? Just how was the man able to take down those 4 in merely 5 seconds? With a grim expression, the leader asked, "How did you guys die?" "We got insta-killed." "Insta-killed? You got insta-killed by a mage?" The leader was even more shocked. He was currently talking to a warrior. The term insta-kill was usually not applicable to warriors, unless they happened to encounter a boss many levels above theirs. "That's right," was the warrior's confident answer. The leader glanced at that side of the beach again. "Fuck, that mage runs so fast." He sighed again as he exchanged a few more messages with the 4. The mage had already run past their group and left the meeting dust. Before, he did not pay further attention to the matter aside from spotting the appearance of an unknown player on what should be a deserted beach. It was only upon further consideration did he realize that almost everything about the mage was suspicious. "We don't know where he has come from or if he's related to what we are doing. Should we continue to entangle with him?" The leader could not come to decision. Had the mage just been any average player, the 4 would have long disposed of him, and the situation would have been resolved. But this interloper just had to be an expert, which only complicated this whole situation even further. Gufei had been waiting for the group to act after taking down the 4 men, but when they failed to take any sort of action after all this while, he quickened his pace and left the area, as well as the group, behind him. This was when Fireball, who had left for the beachside bar, sent over a message to him. The kid had gone to the player-made safe zone in hopes of securing his safety but stumbled upon the gathering of the leaders of Linshui City's various large guilds. Prickling his ears, Fireball managed to overhear about that incident of the magic staff dropping by the west gate. Right now, The staff was in the possession of a guild called Ordnance Works, and the person who had picked up the item already logged out. It was this incident that had left all these guild leaders feeling peeved. It already got looted? This news stunned him. He subconsciously glanced in the direction of that group of men he had left behind. The people he could think of that would gather men outside the city right now were those related to Southern Lone Blade and his comrades. The problem was, besides him, every other participant was clearly after the staff that could resurrect players. But since it had been looted, why were there still people tracking it down out here? Help me find out what the emblem of this Ordnance Works guild looks like, he requested to Fireball before running back toward that group again. When Goofy got further and further away from their group, the leader did not bother to pursue the matter and was fine with letting the matter go. However, they did not expect the man to suddenly turn round and come running toward them of his volition. Archers! The leader blustered out an order. The archers quickly detached themselves from the group and released a hail of arrows toward the mage. Goofy came to a screeching stop and swatted off these arrows. The enemies' mouths all hung open at this, and he used this opportunity to shout, "Hold your fire! I just wish to ask you something. Who on earth are you?" The leader yelled back, "It's not convenient to talk at this distance. Mind if I get closer?" He actually just wanted to see their guild emblem. The thought of catching a glimpse of their guild emblem did not cross his mind when he was insta-killing those 4 men before. The leader wanted to reject Goofy's request, but he had over a dozen men with him right now. It would make for an awkward conversation if he showed fear for just one man, so he nodded. "You may approach." To show he had no ill will, Goofy stowed away his sword into his dimensional pocket. The leader sighed in relief at this. However, if he were privy to Goofy's sword drawing speed, which was no different from it being in his hand, he would surely not have felt relieved. Goofy was before them fast and hurriedly scanned through the men. Fuck! He cursed to himself when he saw that not one of them was wearing their guild emblem. Fireball's message arrived at this point. "I heard that Ordnance Works guild emblem looks like a little tank, it's hard to miss." He had also learned that all the guild leaders were thinking of collaborating to exterminate them, effective immediately. Goofy was not surprised by this nugget of information. Scrutinizing the group before him once more, he saw that all of them had no emblem adorning any part of their body. This lot must have decided to coordinate like this beforehand, he thought to himself. The opposing party watched him walk up to them without speaking a word. Seeing his eyes furtively sweep through them, they finally could not stand it. "Just who in the world are you? What business do you have with us?" "Nothing at all." "Carry on with your business, everyone." He suddenly turned and bolted. "Fuck." Everybody was dumbfounded and exchanged glances. "Leader, do we kill him?" Someone came forward to ask. "Forget it." The leader watched Goofy's figure shrink in the distance. "The less trouble we get into, the better it is for us. Let's just be on our way fast." They then continued their advance, with Goofy slowly growing further away from them. He suddenly realized that no matter what that group was doing, at least he knew which direction they were heading. After all, this beach made up the terrain that ran around Lingshui City in a full circle, so no matter which way he headed, he would likely bump into them along the way. It was with such a thought that he no longer bothered to ask them where they were from and just took off. At this moment, those participating in this Southern Lone Blade business became busy once more, but their target this time was one of their own, Ordnance Works. It had been quite a long time since Lingshui City witnessed any sort of large-scale battles after the dust had settled over the scramble for a beachfront property by the harbor. Each guild had already come to a concord, and everyone was maintaining a state of peace by tending to their respective businesses. However, the appearance of that top-grade equipment once more disrupted this equilibrium. The guild's greed culminated into the leaders gathering by a beachside bar and declaring war on Ordnance Works while drunk. This was the largest coalition of guilds in Lingshui City, with up to 11 different guilds collaborating to target Ordnance Works. Ordnance Works was not so heaven-defying that it could fight off the combined might of 11 guilds. Its guild leader was still in the clouds over the cleverness of his ploy when disaster struck. He was bringing his reinforcement through the streets in search for traces of Southern Lone Blade and his crew when waves of men descended on them from every avenue. Even he had not seen such an imposing scene before. They barely had time to react when they were summarily wiped out. At the same time, Those members that were wearing the small tank emblem on their chests found themselves surrounded. Even the ones out grinding and did not participate in that incident were not exempted. Groups that were not in conflict and various grinding maps suddenly converged toward Ordnance Works members, as if they were some sort of boss, and shredded them into pieces. Many Ordnance Works members were still clueless on what had instigated this assault on them when they respawned. Their guild leader was currently squatting in the spawn point under a pack of angry wolves' piercing glares. What pained him even more was the fact that the group he had sent out to search for Southern Lone Blade's squad had not fallen prey to this sudden attack. They were still moving according to his instructions and were even keeping him updated on their progress. "No, we haven't spotted them yet. Not at all. We haven't located them." Ordnance Works Guild leader finally understood the moral behind the saying, innocent civilians may be implicated for harboring a fugitive king. Ironically, he was currently in an exceptionally awkward situation as he was not really harboring a fugitive king and was only pretending that the staff was in his possession to begin with. Chapter 422, Turning the Ruse. Since the situation had developed to such a point, the guild leader of Ordnance Works no longer dared to hide the matter. With the entire guild implicated as a result of his actions, the guild channel was set aglow as the many guileless members complained about what happened incessantly. Backed into a corner, the guild leader could only come clean to the other guild leaders. He did not get his hands on the Staff of Resurrection, and that the magic staff his men had picked up from that incident before was a fake. None of the guild leaders was personally involved in the massacre on the streets and was actually still leisurely imbibing liquor by the beachside bar. There was no need for them to act themselves. After all, the sensation they received from deciding the fate of countless players with this casual meeting pleased them to no end. All of them were stunned when they received the confession of Ordnance Works Guild leader. They could understand what had prompted Ordnance Works Guild leader to do such a thing, and while they unanimously condemned the man for his short-sightedness, all of them had secretly broken out into a cold sweat. They were certain that had their guild been in Ordnance Works' shoes, it was highly likely that they would have done the same thing, which meant that they would be on the receiving end of this bloodbath. These guild leaders were congratulating themselves and were once more swept up by the possibility of acquiring the equipment when Tanzanite Shade, Blue Umbra's guild leader, coldly spat, "Does he take us to be idiots? Are we gonna believe that he doesn't have it just like that?" They all felt that this was a valid argument and began to consider the possibility of Ordnance Works looking to pull a fast one on them. At this, Tanzanite Shade continued to stoke the flames. "We'll definitely not let these men off so easily. That's right. Let's exterminate these bastards." Everybody was whipped up into a frenzy now. All the guild leaders present were already on edge, and, adding the effects of the liquor they had just drunk, it was very easy to incite aggression in them. Tanzanite Shade watched them curse and command their troops into continuing their vicious hunt and inadvertently revealed the faintest smirk as he fired off a few instructions of his: "Act quickly before the jig is up." Despite how agitated and riled up these guild leaders were, Tanzanite Shade believed that a few of them were cunning enough to prepare for both eventualities. While they continued to order their men to hunt down Ordnance Works members, they were sure to assign some men to locate Southern Lone Blade and his crew. The land outside Linshui City was not large and the line of sight was hardly obstructed. It was a terrain that was ill-suited to conduct any covert operation, so if his guild did not hurry, the plan he had conceived would be for naught. Over by the beach outside the city, Gufei was still running along the shoreline by himself. He had long left that bunch of players behind, and the scenery presented before him was like reeling silk from a cocoon. Finally, along a seemingly endless stretch of the shore, he saw in the distance a 5 or 6 man group of players. He had finally located who he was looking for. Southern Lone Blade's squad made a beeline for where their boats were stashed when they left the city gate. Unfortunately, the group had a warrior and 2 priests in it, so the journey still took some time. The largely unobstructed view afforded by the beach had allowed them monitor every direction and they had not witnessed anything strange crop up all this while. Right now, they could see the waves lapping up from where they had hidden their boats. Just as their hearts surged with relief, Glue shouted as he pointed in a direction, "Someone is running toward us." Someone? Southern Lone Blade did not have eagle eye, so he could not clearly make out the approaching figure. Victory was almost within his grasp, so he did not tarry to ponder any further and just ordered the rest to quicken their pace. Glue had kept his eyes on this figure the whole time. The more familiar the figure seemed, the more fearful he felt. Once he could make out the man with clarity, he bellowed, "Hot damn! It's the video mage. That guy's like a ghost that just won't leave us alone." Everybody took a sharp intake of breath. "He's by himself, though," Flame-Singed Clothes said. A look of glee flashed across their faces. They had misgivings about attacking Gouffé previously because he had Eternal Dominion by his side, but with him alone, they were confident that there was no single player out there that could go up against their elite group's teamwork. "Continue onward. We'll take care of him if he comes over," Southern Lone Blade said. "I wonder how many park points he has on him now after escaping from that street before. If we are lucky, we may just be able to loot his equipment." These men began to fantasize about a wondrous future. The six continued to walk while taking note of Gouffé's movement. Southern Lone Blade sent a message over to Blackwater to confirm his presence before telling the rest to be prepared for combat. Gouffé was closing in on them fast and was already within an archer's attack range, but Glue did not bother to fire off an arrow, as they were very aware of how ineffectual that would be against him. They patiently waited for him to get close enough, so that they could cut off his path of retreat and slowly whittle his HP down. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. These men silently counted Gouffé's every step as they constantly made eye contact with one another, secretly checking his running pattern and already preparing the skills that they would unleash. Just as they mustered their determination to strike, he came to an abrupt halt. He did not attack and merely lifted his hand to point right behind them, hinting for them to turn back. "Do not fall for his trick." Southern Lone Blade was convinced that he was trying to divert their attention and get everybody to turn, so that he could safely cover the remaining distance and attack. Nevertheless, it was Blackwater, who was currently in stealth mode and slowly closing in on Gouffé from behind, that quickly sent over a message upon seeing the shocking sight behind his comrades. "Big South, behind you." Southern Lone Blade had no reason to suspect his comrade, so he quickly looked over his shoulder and saw a pack of players swiftly closing in on them right by the shoreline. The vanguard looked to be lined with archers, who were preparing to unleash an attack in just a few steps. How is this possible? Southern Lone Blade received the shock of his life. The neat formation and carefully configured job class composition seemed to have been prepared in advance as they headed straight toward them. This clearly showed that the enemies had not fallen for their ruse and had been aware of their movement all this while. They had obviously been lying in wait for them. The piercing scream of an arrow was heard. The man leading the pack released his snipe, aiming it directly at Southern Lone Blade. Southern Lone Blade blocked the shot and heard that man shout at the same time, "Brother Southern Blade sure is vicious. Who knows how many players have dropped levels fighting over that fake magic staff you dropped. Looks like it's all over for Ordnance Works, all thanks to your trick." Southern Lone Blade dropped his shield and looked at the man speaking, recognizing him to be Blue Umbra's Vice Guild leader, Reed Arrow of the Willows. He could be considered as the second archer expert in Linshui City right after Glue, but after the latter lost a level, he could rightfully be recognized as the #1 archer now. "It seems you guys weren't fooled in the least, though," Southern Lone Blade casually replied, yet his heart was filled with anxiety. At the moment, his group was up against a large number of players in front and the indomitable Mage Gouffé was still standing right behind them. Escaping would be a huge conundrum. Even if they attempted to take their boats out to the sea right now, one spell bombardment from a mage was all it would take to wipe them out. Reed Arrow of the Willows was merely smiled at his words. "That's why we are very thankful to the help Brother Flame-Singed Clothes has provided." "What?" Flame-Singed Clothes sputtered, thinking that the enemy was trying to sow discord within their ranks. Southern Lone Blade shared his sentiment but suddenly realized what the other meant in 2 seconds. "You guys followed him?" He posed his guess. Indeed, the clueless Flame-Singed Clothes was the only one to be blamed. In the previous battle, he was the only casualty. He was not impeded in the least when he respawned after. His comrades had thought that the enemies had only left men behind to prevent them from logging off. But how would they have guessed that their true intention was far greater? When Flame-Singed Clothes died, Blue Umbra was still the only guild that was on the hunt for them. They feigned ignorance of his respawning and secretly followed him to this spot. The 7 had split up earlier, but the enemies had already guessed that they would be gathering once more. Even if that did not happen in the city, they would still have to get on the same boats if they intended to depart from Linshui City. Thus, they tailed Flame-Singed Clothes from a safe distance until he led them straight to the other six. They might have met up earlier than expected at Linshui City's west gate, and their charade had even fooled the others present, but Blue Umbra was not misled even in the slightest. Nevertheless, his guild continued to keep mum about it. This was like how Ordnance Works had tried to turn the trick into an advantage, allowing Southern Lone Blade to believe that they had successfully shaken off their pursuers when the reality was that they had been on their tail, waiting for the perfect moment to kill them in one fell swoop. Naturally, they were waiting for the full 7-man squad to gather in one place, which would be when they were about to steer their boats away from Linshui City. Blue Umbra had truly thought this through on a grand scale. They even considered Southern Lone Blade's entire 7-man squad to be in possession of the Staff of Resurrection, and their goal was to take them all down at once. This was the only way that they could ensure that the item would fall right into their bombs. Southern Lone Blade was positive that the respective spawn points would be filled with Blue Umbra's members, waiting to ambush them. Essentially, regardless of who was holding that item from here on, the enemies would undoubtedly keep on targeting and looting that person until the Staff of Resurrection dropped. Blue Umbra Guild leader Tanzanite Shade had become the main antagonist in this for rallying troops to exterminate Ordnance Works just to complete his plan. Furthermore, he had gathered all the guild leaders together for the purpose of keeping tabs on their movements more easily. All along, they were secretly keeping their sights on the 7-man squad. Southern Lone Blade was filled with remorse when he thought of this. Being sandwiched between two powerful forces, any compromise would be meaningless. Their only way out of this would be to fight until the bitter end. The 7 exchanged glances, and he saw the same determination from each of them. Reed Arrow of the Willows just happened to direct his men to begin their assault at this moment. The 7 flawlessly evaded their incoming arrows, and the seamless coordination between Southern Lone Blade and Flame-Singed Clothes was seen once more, with the former providing cover, the latter lay down his palatial balefire and blazing tree of 1,000 inferno to quickly cordon off their attackers with a sea of flames. "Quickly get on the boats!" Glue bellowed. While the two were providing them respite with their seamless coordination, his task was to attack Gufei to buy them more time. In the end, all Gufei did was casually dodge that arrow Glue had sent his way, making the archer feel as if his existence were insignificant and useless. Southern Lone Blade and his crew took note of Gufei's actions even as they hurried toward the boats, but what left them surprised was that he did not even make any attempts to stop them from leaving. Chapter 423, Pushing Boats with the Current. The 7 could hardly believe their eyes as they stared at the motionless Gufei while they prepared to jump into their boats. "You guys go ahead." Southern Lone Blade and Flame-Singed Clothes stayed behind to keep the fires burning by the shore. Even though Flame-Singed Clothes had died twice, Palatial Balefire was a spell that came from his magic staff, so the damage it dealt was not in the least bit affected, and since his focus on the rate of spell cooldown remained the same, the Wall of Fire and Sea of Flames he created became the two spells that helped delay the enemies from advancing on them. Still, their enemies had nationally made preparations prior to engaging them. It would truly be too much of a joke if they allowed the 7 to easily escape. The ranged job classes among them began to wildly unleash their attacks. No matter how powerful Flame-Singed Clothes and Southern Lone Blade were, there was simply no way they could deal with this unending wave of attacks coming toward them. How would the two have the time to continue impeding the enemy's progress if they had to keep dodging and evading all these attacks? Southern Lone Blade continued to brandish his shield, but he seemed to have come to a sort of decision as he turned to regard Gufei expressionlessly before suddenly taking an item out of his dimensional pocket and tossing it over. "This is half. You'll get the other half once this matter is settled." Gufei unhurriedly opened the coin pouch and checked it before sending a message on the mercenary channel. "I've received half of the payment. Time to act, then." Young Master Han instructed. Just as Southern Lone Blade's 6 companions wondered about what had just happened, Gufei pulled his sword out and pointed its tip outward and caused a fiery glow to descend from the sky. Many Blue Umbra members got caught in the blast and suffered heavy losses from their deaths, turning those that remained pale from fear. This outcome was not because they were unable to escape from the spell but because, given the advantage that they now held, Nobody minded about a spell landing on them. Only when the two parties were well matched in strength would they fuss over every attack made. Blue Umbra paid the price for their audacity of underestimating the mage standing on the sidelines. This should not be blamed on them, though. Who would have guessed that a nondescript and plain mage would be such a powerhouse? More importantly, when they saw Glue attack the mage just then, they just assumed that the man was their enemy's enemy, which by extension meant that he would be friendly. They really did not expect for the mage to come swinging at them and was capable of dishing out such a devastating damage with his one blow. What's going on? Forget about Blue Umbra. Even the 6 men with Southern Lone Blade were at a loss on what had just transpired. All they saw was their comrade tossing out something like a coin pouch at the video mage, as if they had come to an agreement over something. We'll talk about this later, let's get out of here first. He said this through gritted teeth, clearly showing how hard of a struggle it was for him to work with Gouffé on this electric wall. Gouffé swung his sword horizontally, creating yet another obstacle next to Flame-Singed Clothes' Palatial Balefire. Flame-Singed Clothes had a short cooldown for that skill, so he could now toss out a second one. The moment he saw Gouffé's electric wall come down, he coordinated his next Palatial Balefire and connected his wall of flames with Gouffé's spell. With 2 Palatial Balefire and 1 electric wall connected together in a row, a great wall was erected, which cordoned off that small beach. Southern Lone Blade's 7-man squad did not bother with anything else as they used this chance to clamber on board their boats. The melee job classes from Blue Umbra tried to find their way around this great wall. As for the ranged job classes, the 7 men were already outside of the mage's attack range, while Southern Lone Blade's shield was easily blocking their archers' arrows. On the other side, Gouffé, who had sprung forward, beginning to wield his sword and slew another bunch of players. Southern Lone Blade stared intensely at Gouffé. Both parties had indeed come to an agreement, but given the bad blood between them, he was entirely apprehensive about Gouffé's commitment to this job he was tasked with. He had only gambled on this devil's pact after being driven to a corner like this. He had not expected for Gouffé to be a man of his words and zealously provide them cover for their escape as best as he could. For example, if he were not deflecting a portion of the arrows currently sailing toward them, it might be difficult for their whole squad to remain unscathed like this. Blue Umbra's players had not expected for a third party to disrupt their intricately planned formation. They were all extremely dejected when they saw that their 7 targets were about to get on their boats and escape. This was when a whistling arrow came blasting by, striking a player dead center and causing the man to morph into white light. Reed Arrow of the Willows, the present #1 archer in Linshui City, was shocked. Realizing that another peak expert was nearby, he turned in the direction where the arrow was released and, sure enough, spotted an archer who was in the middle of fiercely letting loose his arrows at them. Even though it was just one archer, his shot specifically picked off the job classes with lower HP, whose first shot would significantly lower their HP and the second would kill them outright. His sudden involvement caused the members from Blue Umbra to panic and flustered them momentarily. Reed Arrow of the Willows was completely blindsided by this. There was no information about Southern Lone Blade's 7-man squad having such peak experts as helpers, so why would there suddenly be 2 appearing right now? By now, some melee job classes had managed to loop around the wall of spells, and were ignoring these changes as they concentrated on hurtling towards Southern Lone Blade's team and forced Gouffé to take a big step forward to block their advancement. When they saw that the mage dared to arrogantly attempt to obstruct them, their frustration caused them all to roar and collectively pounce on him. Gouffé did not move to dodge and, instead, stepped forward to take them on, gyrating his body as he held his horizontally raised moonlit knifefalls in a reverse grip while he turned. When his right arm was turned to its maximum point, he seamlessly swapped it to his left hand and continued its path without pausing. The efficiency of one twin incineration was dramatically increased when it was executed in tandem with his specialized footwork as he turned his body and his technique of swapping the weapon in his hands, allowing him to complete 2.5 revolutions. The total area of attack this move covered was at ridiculous 900 degrees, and the speed he demonstrated was even more unbelievable. Anybody watching him from the sidelines would have seen Gufei execute this attack in the blink of an eye, leaving a fiery trail that went on for 2.5 revolutions, which annihilated many of the players around him. This one attack not only displayed his high-level kung fu, it also contained a measure of gaming skills. When the sword passed from the right hand to the left hand and vice versa, the player had to quickly set their dominant hand accordingly as well. Only by swapping it over and over each time would Gufei be able to continue dealing out that huge damage. That was actually the more troublesome aspect of his move, as he had expended quite a lot of his personal time into practicing it before he managed to reach such a high level of efficacy. The flames continued to persist even as the low HP players died out, while those that had survived were near death themselves, each looking ashen. Gufei was already out of mana at this point, yet nobody dared to get near him even as he stood within the crowd. Southern Lone Blade and his squad that had already steered their boats out of the shore were left dumbfounded by that scene. This was especially true for Flame-Cinched Clothes, who saw how one twin incineration was executed to the point that went beyond his wildest expectation. He took out his magic staff and attempted a twin incineration of his own, yet the ensuing flames extinguished after he completed a 60-degree swipe. An attack range of 900 degrees. That was 15 times more than anything he could have done. He could feel his whole body going weak. Gufei looked toward the water while holding Moonlit Nightfalls. Seeing that Southern Lone Blade and his crew had already left the shore, he swiftly told the players around him, "What are you all standing around for? Go chase after them." With that, he steadied his gaze and humbly walked out of the crowd with a nonchalant face, seeming to be no more than a passerby. "Quickly chase after them!" Blue Umber's men shouted as if they were trying to rouse themselves from their stupor. They ignored Gufei's presence and sprinted toward the shore, but because the group had already steered their boats clear, the mages were unable to hit anyone with their spells while the archers' attacks were easily neutralized by Southern Lone Blade's shield and the two priests' heal. They simply did not have enough firepower to accomplish the deed. Reed Arrow of the Willows reported this incident to Tanzanite Shade in his exasperation. When he looked up, he spotted another team approaching from the opposite direction and felt glum once more. Had they arrived a moment sooner, the situation might have not reached such a low point like this. He shifted his gaze onto the main culprit Gufei, who had already turned and looked to be taking his leave, and in a moment of anger that seared from his heart, he yelled, "Stop right there!" Gufei stood still and looked over his shoulder with a gaze that beheld cold regard. Reed Arrow of the Willows suddenly felt the hair on his nape stand up. He had no idea where to begin either and looked back at his comrades, who were all staring at him with plenty of resentment. It was as if they were extremely unhappy about him challenging the mage. Whatever the case might be, he had already called out to the man. Reed Arrow of the Willows moved to explain himself when he saw the man turn around again and ran away recklessly. "Fuck!" everybody exclaimed. Running away like that clearly showed his guilty conscience. That man acted so cool before, exterminating 2 bunches of players with his attacks, yet seeing him flee right now only showed how hesitant he was at striking them. "Fuck, don't just run there. Follow them." Instantly, the bunch of players showed a bit of courage as some raised their weapons to give chase. Reed Arrow of the Willows had also been left speechless by Gufei's action, but he had already received Tanzanite Shade's instruction. Without losing his cool, he prevented everybody from taking any further risks and directed them back to the task at hand: quickly get some boats and pursue Southern Lone Blade. Gufei looked over his shoulder and saw that the enemies no longer seemed to wish to continue fighting with him, so he composed himself even as he asked over the mercenary channel, "I got the money and the group has left, so what exactly is this plan of yours? Come over to these coordinates." Young Master Han sent over a series of numbers. Gufei quickly made his way to the given location. "Bring Royal along," young Master Han suddenly reminded. Gufei grabbed Royal God Call, who was still standing by the beach looking stunned, and the two headed toward the given coordinates. The given coordinates were still by the shore. 2 little boats were ready and waiting when they arrived at the location. Sword Demon, young Master Han, Brother Assist, and War Without Wounds were all aboard, as well as 2 boatmen respectively. "Quickly get on the boat!" Brother Assist shouted to the 2. Both got on one together, and the boatmen on board seemed to have already received instructions, since he began to immediately steer the boat off the shore. "Just what is going on? Where are we going?" Gufei had wanted to kill Southern Lone Blade's team back by the beach but was stopped by young Master Han's message about the transaction he had made with Southern Lone Blade. He was told to pick up the payment before young Master Han filled him in on the details. Gufei had originally taken this task to help Eternal Dominion earn some money, so he naturally would not reject the payment offered. At the same time, he was worried about what he could earn from killing Southern Lone Blade and his crew. But since young Master Han told him that everything was already arranged, he did not really bother to ask for further clarification. This was why Southern Lone Blade received Gufei's aid after he paid the cost for their help. "We're chasing after Southern Lone Blade," Sword Demon answered. "Eternal Dominion still in the city," he reminded. "We don't have the time to wait for him." Standing by the bow of the watercraft, young Master Han turned to point toward a certain section of the sea and ordered the two boatmen, "Give chase in that direction." "You have that trinket, too?" Gufei suddenly spotted the item young Master Han was holding and was amazed. "I borrowed it," young Master Han informed. "From Vast Lushness?" he asked. How did you know it was from her?" Young Master Han asked back. "I saw her get it with my own eyes," he gave this answer. "Is that so?" It was not often young Master Han's eyes would twinkle like this. What quest did she would get it from? Chapter 424, Player C Route. Gufei told the members of Young Master's Elite about that time he had accrued up to 30 park points while he was out in the sea and how the system had sent some of the city guards out on their dhow to pursue him. Young Master Han nodded when he heard this, asking, "And are you at 30 park points yet?" "No," he answered, his face black with anger. He knew that young Master Han had not asked that question out of concern and was most likely hoping for him to accumulate 30 park points once more, drawing out another fleet as a result, so that the latter could use the chance to get himself a spyglass of his own. "Keep at it, then." Young Master Han said this before he once more lifted the spyglass to continue his surveillance of the two boats Southern Lone Blade and his squad were commandeering. The existence of this spyglass was why Young Master's Elite had been able to get a good grasp of what was happening around them despite not being physically present. While the Forever in Flowers players toiled endlessly as they went up and down the shoreline searching through bush and brush, all Young Master's Elite did upon learning what had happened by the West Gate was to leave by the same gate and use that spyglass they had acquired to look out over by the vast beach, easily finding out where Southern Lone Blade's squad was headed. Young Master Han had no idea how Blue Umbra was able to keep their eye on Southern Lone Blade's squad, but he knew that they would surely succeed in intercepting them. As such, using Brother Assist to contact Southern Lone Blade, Young Master Han informed them that Young Master's Elite was open for a transaction if they needed help to escape. Southern Lone Blade was of course unaware that his group had already fallen for Blue Umbra's entrapment at that point and had merely thought that Young Master's Elite was trying to pull a fast one on them, attempting to buy time, hoping to cloud their judgment, or fishing out their location. Essentially, Southern Lone Blade did not really bother to pay further attention to the matter. It was only when Blue Umbra Guild and Gufei sandwiched them, with the former going all out and the latter standing behind doing nothing, and was left with no other option that Southern Lone Blade was forced to make that deal. He did not trust Young Master's Elite in the least, but he was truly backed into a corner back then. All he could do was pray for a Hail Mary, which he had hardly expected to actually pay off. Southern Lone Blade still had his doubts over the matter even as the boat sailed onward, so he called on Glue to keep watch of their surroundings for anything unusual. Glue looked around with his eagle eye but discovered nothing. Southern Lone Blade was no longer that worried about Blue Umbra at this point. Was it that easy to form up a flotilla for them to give chase so quickly? Instead, it was Young Master's Elite that Southern Lone Blade was most worried of, suspecting that they had already made preparations to secretly ambush them. Southern Lone Blade only slightly eased up when Glue uncovered nothing. He was personally steering the boat, cutting it obliquely across the water to make it difficult for anybody else to discover their route. How was he supposed to know that Young Master Han watching his every move from afar with a spyglass? Though it was just impossible for Southern Lone Blade to depend on an archer's eagle eye to spot this tale of theirs. The two parties were each on their respective boats as young Master's elite continued their pursuit of Southern Lone Blade's squad from a distance. Ask them when we will receive the other half of the payment. Young Master Han had his spyglass trained on the other two boats even as he told Brother Assist to ask that question. The others really wished they could stand on Southern Lone Blade's side when they heard this, for this man was truly being far too vicious. Young Master Han had already told them of his current plan while they were in pursuit. His plan was to force Southern Lone Blade's group into leaving Lin Shui City and to continue the hunt after the group completely settled down in another city. This was the only way they could grasp the group's constant respawn, and it would not be like what had happened in Lin Shui City where the said opportunity to corner the squad had landed in the hands of Blue Umbra. Everybody finally understood that young Master Han was adamant on getting his hands on the Staff of Resurrection from Southern Lone Blade's squad upon hearing this scheme. However, his claim that he would not use it personally and would, instead, sell it for profits to be split among them, kept everybody enthused. Gu Fei was busy as well. On top of informing Eternal Dominion that Southern Lone Blade and his men had already successfully made their escape and hurrying him to make his way to the harbor in order to meet up, he also told Sakurazaka Muni and Vast Lushness that they no longer had to busy themselves with the matter as it was already under control. The person he disappointed the most was Fireball, who was sitting pitifully by that beachside bar, waiting for him to come help him clear his park points, only to find out that he had already departed from Lin Shui City. Gu Fei had no choice but to tell Fireball to avoid any pursuers as best as he could and to get on a vessel leaving the city as well. Soon, everybody had been floating on that body of water for over half an hour. Besides young Master Han, who remained standing by the bow of his boat, relaying the direction to the two boatmen, the other 5 were left with nothing to do. Royal God Call had taken out his bow and was shooting at the fishes for fun. War Without Wounds was in a discussion with the boatmen about the different rowing techniques. Brother Assist had taken out his little booklet, and it was unknown just what he was researching about. Sword Demon was meditating in the middle of the boat, and the dagger he had been holding was now being held between his fingers like a cigarette without him noticing it. Gu Fei stared at Sword Demon, wondering just when he would put the dagger between his lips, but he did not see this even after waiting for a long time. Sword Demon simply maintained his posture while in deep thought. In the end, without anything to do and out of boredom, Gu Fei went to talk to the only other person on the boat besides young Master Han and Sword Demon. "Where are we going?" he asked, feeling that a boatman would be more familiar with the waterways of Lin Shui City. "I'm still not sure, going by the direction we are heading." The man shook his head. Just as he said this, young Master Han issued another instruction: turn to the left a little. The boatman seemed to have realized something as he told Gu Fei, "If we keep going left, we will reach Xiaoyu City." "What city?" Gu Fei thought his answer would either be Lori City or Linian City. Never did he expect that there would be a third city near Lin Shui City. "Xiaoyu City," the man repeated. "What city?" This time, the person asking was young Master Han, who was evidently surprised by this answer. But before the boatman could repeat it for the third time, young Master Han had already turned to address Brother Assist, who was on the other boat. "Do you know that there's another city out here, Brother Assist?" "Is that so?" Brother Assist was shocked. "This waterway only connects to Linian and Lori City, I've already checked this." The boatman chuckled at that. "It's true that the waterway here connects to the two cities, but that's only according to the routes the system has set. While the ferry will only connect to these two cities, we are now on a private boat, so it is not impossible for us to row our way out to Xiaoyu City." After hearing all this, young Master Han sighed. "That means we are going to this other city and not Linian City, right?" "Is that going to be a problem?" Gu Fei asked. "Nope, but this is definitely not good news for someone else," young Master Han said. "Have you contacted Deep Waters?" Sword Demon asked. I think so. I can't recall." Young Master Han once more resumed his stance by the bow. On the edge of the woods in Linian City, Deep Waters had brought along several guild members and was lying in wait all along the shoreline. "Guild leader, what are we doing here?" someone asked. "Someone's coming up ashore here, but they are using a private boat, so since we can't be sure where they'll end up, We'll have to ambush them this way, Deep Waters answered. Got it. Nobody else in the guild bothered to ask further. They had faith in their guild leader and believed that they were on some important mission. The work was not particularly tiring, anyway, as all they had to do was to lie in the tall grass and keep watch of the shore. Deep Waters took the lead as the guild leader, sprawling within the brush like Kushaoi on one, staying still. It's almost time, he thought to himself after glancing at the time. Another half an hour passed, and from young Master Han's spyglass, he could see that the boat's southern Lone Blade and his squad were already nearing the coast. There was no pier nearby, confirming the fact that they were indeed landing at Sayata City, which the system ferries were not connected to. The 7 of them were in no rush to leave upon disembarking, as they searched around to properly hide their boats. All this while, Southern Lone Blade was reminding Lu to keep his eyes on the water. Of course, young Master Han had witnessed all this, so he quickly reminded the 2 boatmen to slow down to prevent their boats from being sighted by Glu's eagle eye. Shortly after, the 7 began to pack up and made to leave as young Master Han quickly indicated for both their boats to dock ashore. Are we gonna be able to chase after them at this rate? Royal God Call asked. With this thing here, why would we have trouble locating them? This isn't Linian City. Young Master Han tapped the spyglass as he gave this reply. Given Linian City's thick foliage, the usefulness of the spyglass would be extremely limited, which was why young Master Han had asked Deep Waters to keep watch, but since they did not end up going to Linian City, it made sense for his spyglass to become useful once more. After all, it was always better to depend on your efforts than on others. Unexpectedly, the boatman laughed once more when he heard this. That thing you have won't be of any use in Sayata City, either. Why? Young Master Han was stunned before he read out the city's name too once more. Unless. Hey, yes. This city is extremely foggy. The answer was just as young Master Han had surmised. Everybody looked at one another. They had expended quite the effort chasing Southern Lone Blade's squad all the way here. Would they just allow their targets to escape under this natural fog? This was when young Master Han received a new message from Deep Waters. It's been over an hour. Where are those guys? I have good news and bad news. Which would you like to hear first? Young Master Han answered with a question. Don't be a cliché, just give it to me straight. A sense of foreboding crept up on Deep Waters. The truth of the matter is that they didn't end up going to Linian City, so you guys can pack up and rest. Have an early night's sleep, haha. You fucking asshole, are you trying to pull a fast one on me? You won't believe me even if I tell you, anyway. This time, I made a mistake in my deduction. Who are you trying to fool? See, I told you you're not going to believe me, but I don't understand it, either. How would someone as clever as me make a mistake? Young Master Han sighed. Let's not talk about this for now, there are still things we need to do. I'll contact you again at a later time. After saying his piece, he swiftly placed Deep Waters on his block list to no longer be bothered by his message bombardment. He turned to his fellow mercenaries on the 2 boats and said, Comrades, this could very well be the biggest challenge we have faced thus far. In this unknown city and foreign land, do we have the confidence to kill off Southern Lone Blade's group? Just tell me where he's at, and it'll be a piece of cake, Goofy answered lazily. This one comment had really struck young Master Han to his core. This was the first time an unexpected element had essentially scuttled the entire plan he had in mind. Brother Assist was also very remorseful on his end. This is my fault, I got careless. No, it isn't your fault. Young Master Han waved his hand dismissively. Everybody thought that he was about to own up to his mistake and was eagerly waiting to relish this utterance when he, instead, coolly turned around and face-palmed. Sayata City? Whose goddamn bright idea was it to design something like this? The very scrupulous gaming employee Yi Xiaoyu suddenly sneezed loudly somewhere out in the real world. Chapter 425, Information about Sayata City. The 2 boats that young Master's elite were aboard docked by the shore. The 6 men leapt off the boats and paid the fee, as the 2 boatmen rowed off. Young Master Han lifted the spyglass and turned it toward the direction Southern Lone Blade and the rest had headed. But all he saw was thick fog. Motherfucker. Young Master Han cursed to himself. The other 5 had gathered around and took turn at the spyglass to check their surroundings, each shaking their heads and sighing. Shall we head to Zyota City first? Sword Demon suggested. Everybody nodded. Since they were here, they could not just give up and return even though they had no idea where Southern Lone Blade and his squad were, for that would just be too shameful. Wounds, go destroy their boats, young Master Han said. Everybody was in low spirits, and War Without Wounds was no exception. He marched over to where Southern Lone Blade and the others had hidden their boats and dragged them onto the beach. Fishing out a battle axe from his dimensional pocket, he savagely wrecked the boats into splinters, venting out his frustration in the process. Young Master Han had already collected a sizable bundle of kindling from the surroundings and tossed it to the ground. He even fished out a booklet from his pocket and tore a few pages out, calling to Gufei, "Ace, lend me a light." Fireball. Gufei extended his sword and chanted, creating a ball of flame on its tip. Young Master Han reached over and set the booklet in his hand ablaze and stuffed it into that pile of kindling, before looking over to War Without Wounds. Activate your cyclone. What for? War Without Wounds asked. Give it a little air. Thus, War Without Wounds activated his cyclone upon his request. With the additional wind, the fire spread from the paper to the kindling to the splintered wood that was once the boat. Some of the wood was still wet, so the ensuing fire and heat only caused it to billow out a black smoky haze as it burned. This made them all flee from the smog cursing, since they had all circled around to watch the fire burn. War Without Wounds was coughing a fit as he got enveloped in a heap of ash when he ended his cyclone. He coughed and hacked loudly as he fled, yelling to the others, "Won't such a huge smoke expose our presence?" Young Master Han continued to look around the fog that surrounded them even as he muttered, "It'd be great if we can lure out Southern Lone Blade's group just like that." It was unknown whether the fog was simply too dense or Southern Lone Blade's squad had never once looked back, but the blazing fire continued to belch out smog that attracted no one, becoming no more than a release for their frustration. In the end, the splintered wood from the boat were too wet to be burned, as War Without Wounds stared at the remaining pile of wood and grumbled resentfully, "I wish I could just piss on this." The others glanced at him, not bothering to address the man's crudeness. The game allowed players to eat and drink because those were a form of enjoyment, but it saw no point in simulating pointless things, such as needing to use the toilet. If there was indeed such a sensation, people would surely rush to log off, since that would just lead to them pissing in their pants. "Let's head to Zyota City." Young Master Han pointed forward and began to stride off. Sword Demon and Brother Assist were right behind him. Gufei wrapped his hand round Royal God Call's shoulder and asked, "Hey, Royal, why are you quaking in your boots? What nonsense are you talking about?" "Who's quaking?" Royal God Call lowered his head to look. He was indeed feeling rather nervous, but to say he was quaking in his boots would be an exaggeration. Gufei laughed. "You'd better follow us closely, then." As Royal God Call quickly tagged along. In the game, coordinates were provided to help with positioning, so the fog was not that big of a deal in any sense. However, with how inept Royal God Call was when it came to reading coordinates, an idiot like him that had no sense of direction could only depend on visible markers and landmarks to determine where to go. So the existence of Zyota City could really be considered as a nightmare to him. The 6 men had left the shore for quite some time and were slowly entering the fog proper. They were no longer able to see the body of water that they had left behind when they looked backward just now, as their vision had been entirely obscured by the fog. Young Master Han, who was very sensitive to distance, coordinates and the like, was able to conclude soon after, "We have around 50 or 60 meters of vision around us." "Royal, can you see further with your eagle eye?" Royal God Call looked all around, but he had no idea how to compare how far he could see. Young Master Han had no choice but to pick something to take as a reference. Pointing in a certain direction, he asked, "Do you see that vague outline of the tree in the distance?" Royal God Call stared at where he was pointing for a bit. "Where? Why can't I see it?" "Fuck, Eagle Eye, my foot." Young Master Han snorted. "That's a tree? I think that's more like a house." "Royal, do you see that house?" Gufei gazed at the same direction young Master Han had pointed and saw a house instead of a tree. "Nope. All I see is a huge rock, Royal God Call answered. Everybody was speechless. It was truly far too foggy out here. Although young Master Han claimed that they had a maximum vision of 50 to 60 meters, they were not even able to tell if that thing 50 to 60 meters ahead of him was a tree, a rock, or a house. It was as if they quite literally had no vision at all. I think it's best if we hurry on our way. Perhaps, things will be better once we reach the city. Brother Assist flipped through his booklet as he said this. He had some general information about Xiao, the city's coordinates. The reason he had forgotten about this city's existence was that they had been too focused on the waterway routes set by the system. This way. Brother Assist looked at the coordinates and led the way, even as he gave a brief overview of the city. Everyone has already seen the unique feature of this city. This heavy fog we see now is apparently a bit better in this city than here. The largest guild in this region is called Flower Gazing in the Fog, and it's a level 6 guild. There are plenty of level 5 mercenary groups as well. In terms of experts, there are 4 players who are listed among the 10 great adepts. The ranked 7th warrior is 3 Sighs of Flowing Maple. He's the guild leader of the Flower Gazing in the Fog guild. There's also the thief that's currently ranked 4th on the leaderboards, Cool Apple. Windcord is ranked 8th as a fighter, and then there's the mage that is ranked 2nd on the job class leaderboard, which is also one of the newest entrants to the 5 unyielding experts, Slaries. I'm sure everybody finds this name familiar? Yeah, Goofy answered. The others looked at him in amazement. How do you know? They were clear just what sort of person he was. And he was someone who almost had no interest in what was happening in-game. Any expert he met would be treated as cannon fodder, and he would never care about what sort of reputation or name they had forged for themselves by their in-game achievements. For Goofy to know who player Slaris was, could there perhaps be some sort of secret affair going on here? You two know each other? Brother Assist asked. He felt that he had a good grasp of Goofy as a person, and the only possibility for the two to know each other would be if they knew her in real life. No, but I've seen that name before. Goofy volunteered this information. Where did you see it? The other experts were all paying close attention. The forums, Goofy replied. You visit the forums too? Brother Assist was excited. Could it be that a bit of his interest had rubbed off on Goofy after spending so much time together? This must be what charm meant. It was a long time ago, he said. It had truly been long ago. During that time when he failed to show restraint and slew no smile 8 times, his equipment was appraised and dissected on the forums, drawing a huge discussion. Back then, an account by the name of Slaris had caught his attention. Even though this person had no idea that his indomitability was entirely due to his knowledge of Kung Fu, the final analysis was very methodical and detailed. While he had no idea if that forum's Slaris was the same person as this in-game Slaris, he nevertheless had quite a strong impression of the name. Oh, so that's the case. Brother Assist was quite astonished after he had given this explanation, since this meant the latter managed to remember the name even though it had been so long. Brother Assist was certain he had also viewed the same thread that Goofy was talking about, as he did have the biggest impression of that particular analysis, but he had long forgotten who the account holder was. Based on the analysis, it seems that that person is an expert. Still, there's no guarantee that this person and that person are one and the same, Brother Assist commented. Goofy nodded his head. Actually, he had only casually answered yeah when Brother Assist asked if everybody found the Slaris name familiar and had not expected for them to have such a huge reaction. Right now, he felt that they were acting really snoopy, especially when they tried to dig out the underlying meaning from his flippant answer. Forget about the leaderboards. Sword Demon was the one addressing everyone now. Given the difficulty in grinding levels in Parallel World, the difference between our levels is minuscule. Equipment and skill are the more important factors. Even though Southern Lone Blade lost a level, I sincerely doubt that the 10 great adepts in his job class would dare to confidently claim that they can beat him. Yes, what Sword Demon said is true. Look at how that idiot Drifting is the #1 on the Mage leaderboards, but he doesn't even have a hair's breadth of a chance to win when pitted against Miles. Royal God Call said. Everybody gave him the side eye. The example Royal God Call had given was simply far too outrageous since Goofy's indomitability was entirely unrepresentative of the masses. The level of abnormality that he demonstrated might not be possible to surpass by a difference of 5 or even 10 levels. At this moment, Sword Demon recalled how a level 10 Goofy managed to defeat himself at level 25 and really found it unbearable to look back. With the discussion about Slyries coming to an end, Brother Assist continued his report. There's one of the 7 bottlenecks here as well. The ranked 11th on the Thieves leaderboard, Yenziazu. Oh, that sounds like a young girl's name. War Without Wounds said. And it feels that she'd be a pretty girl, too. Royal Godcall commented. We'll need to find an opportunity to compare notes, War Without Wounds said gravely. Goofy really wished he could introduce the two of them to Forever in Flowers. He was certain they would get along like a house on fire. The 6 continued onward when Goofy received Eternal Dominion's message, asking for his whereabouts. Zyota City, you know how to get here? Goofy asked. What route do I take? Eternal Dominion asked. The system does not have a path here. You'll have to rent a boat from one of the guilds by the beachside bar to send you over. Goofy gave a rundown of the process, mainly because Linshui City was not particularly safe. Any wrong move in finding a boat, an Eternal Dominion might end up on a boat with dubious intentions, but a business operated by a large guild would be far more reliable. So there should not be any issues if they were approached. Eternal Dominion happened to be waiting by the harbor to catch a ferry, but upon learning that he had to look for a private boat himself, he again headed to the bar to inquire after the matter. Sure enough, the various guilds that had these bars set up also operated such a side business and would nationally be quick to service any potential client. However, getting over to Zyota City via boat was pricey. Since there was not a route that was operated by the system, the players would of course take this chance to capitalize on this. Despite being one of the 5 unyielding experts, Eternal Dominion was actually a player without much money to his name. This was because he was just like Goofy. The time he spent diving into the game was limited compared to a common gamer. At the moment, he took out his money pouch and counted out a total of 98 gold coins, 76 silver coins and 54 bronze coins. When the other man saw this scene, he reckoned this customer must surely be poor and decided to forgo nitpicking and graciously gave him a 5 gold coin discount, charging him 95 gold coins in the end. Eternal Dominion took the boat and made his way over. He felt that this trip of his to earn money really had some risk to it. It would be truly disastrous if he made his way over and did not manage to earn some money from killing Southern Lone Blade. At that point, he might not even have enough on him to pay for the trip back. I really can't make head or tails. Just how do the heroes of yore never seem to lack money despite not doing any work? Eternal Dominion was lying on the boat, with one foot raised idly over his knee and his head being cushioned by his arms, and wondering this to himself as the boat bobbed its way along to his destination. Chapter 426, The 4 Rooms traversing across mountains, ridges, valleys, and rivers. The terrain around Zyota City was anything but simple. However, the one thing that remained unchanged was the heavy fog that hung all around them, which made the journey exceptionally difficult for the 6 men. Because they were aware of the city's direction but not the road to it, they could only forge ahead in a straight line. They had no choice but to face whatever sort of danger or dilemma that they came across or met along the way head on. They eventually started coming across other players, and their journey became a lot easier upon inquiring after the right path. When the number of people they met along the road increased, the 6 men could tell that they were getting closer and closer to Zyota City. Brother Assist went to ask another passerby and came running back, happily announcing, "That player is only at level 14, so I reckon it won't be too long till we reach the city." Sure enough, after walking for a bit, the outline of Zyota City came into view through the heavy fog, and the 6 seemed to be about to reach the city walls. Zyota City's heavy fog was so impermeable that even something as huge as a city got shrouded by it. Players were coming and going by the city gate. The moment their group brushed shoulders with someone, young Master Han asked, "How do I get to the tavern?" This person carefully peered at his face in surprise before telling him the location of the nearest tavern. Young Master Han turned back and saw the other 5 men staring at him disdainfully. "I believe we are here to hunt after Southern Lone Blade," Goofy said. "I know that, but we've asked plenty of players along the way, and none of them saw a squad pass them, so we currently have no idea where they are heading." As the group leader, I decided that we should locate the bar to act as our rendezvous point and have a drink or two before we begin discussing our long-term plan. Perhaps, Southern Lone Blade is as clever as me and has thought up of the same wonderful plan as I did. There's no telling that we just might meet each other there, young Master Han said. Wonderful my ass, these people muttered. However, the situation that young Master Han had said did indeed have a chance of occurring. Having traveled all this way and finally reaching the new location, they were all tired and found nothing wrong with heading to a tavern to rest for a bit. With that, the 6 men all went to the nearest tavern. They looked around anxiously the moment they pushed open the door and entered, yet they found nothing. It seemed that Southern Lone Blade and his crew were not that delicate, even though they had an exhausting day spent in desperate flight. It was still unknown just where they had run off to. It seemed as if young Master Han's purpose for being here was just to wet his whistle. While everybody was looking for traces of Southern Lone Blade around the place, he had already slid right up to the counter and ordered 2 bottles, picking out a table and sitting himself down. By the time everybody came over, he had already polished off an entire bottle by himself. Brother assist, ask Southern Lone Blade when he'll pay us the rest of what we're owed, young Master Han said. I've already asked him, and he hasn't replied to me yet, Brother Assist informed. Could he have blocked you, too? Young Master Han thought aloud. What do you mean by too? Brother Assist was confused. Oh, nothing that concerns you, young Master Han said and finished 2 more glasses. He was now facing the others. Let us analyze our current scenario. The first scenario is probably the worst. Southern Lone Blade's 7-man squad is using the heavy fog to randomly walk about in it. They didn't zao the city and went to another location, instead. That's jinxing it too much. Quickly spit, spit, spit. Young Master Han poured a glass of liquor and passed it over to War Without Wounds as he said this. War Without Wounds was in a daze. I'm not the one jinxing things, so why must I be the one doing the spitting? Besides this scenario, they would have most likely reached Xiao City. Alright, everyone, let's do a bit of a role play. What will you do the moment you see a new city? What we're doing now is my answer, young Master Han said. I'll go register my account in a spawn point. Sword Demon was the more cautious and dependable sort. I'll casually walk around the city and chat up with locals before heading to the Hall of Mercenaries to check things out. Brother Assist was the sort to collect information, so he enjoyed quickly getting a grasp of a city's distribution of strength. Walk around, familiarize myself with the terrain, and take note of the coordinates for the important landmarks. Royal Godcall was useless at finding his way around. Head to the local peddler's street or auction house and look around. See if there's any new equipment I haven't seen before. War Without Wounds was the kind that would never forget to fish for material benefits. The last was Gufei. I'll clear off my park value. He was the slayer that would forever be burdened with park points. 6 players with 6 different dancers. Among them, what Gufei, Brother Assist, and Royal Godcall would do could be considered as anomalies, unlikely to be replicated by Southern Lone Blade and the men he was with. Young Master Han's scenario was essentially eliminated by now. This was the closest tavern from the city gate, so if Southern Lone Blade and his crew had any intention of taking a rest, it would logically speaking be here. So that means they'll either be registering their account or shopping, Brother Assist concluded. When these men heard the 2 options, all of them felt that the first was more likely. It sounded weird for the 7 men to immediately go shopping after arriving in a new city. The rest of them all regarded War Without Wounds scornfully for even providing this option. This person is really far too lacking in machismo. He'll actually go shopping the moment he arrives at a new city. It was finally young Master Han who made the arrangement. Sword Demon, head over to the nearest spawn point and check things out. Sword Demon nodded his head and left. Miles, head to the various taverns and look around, young Master Han said. What for? The 7th scenario will be Southern Lone Blade and his squad having friends here, so they may meet up with someone. Makes sense. He nodded and departed as well. Sword Demon would not be discovered since he had stealth, while Gufei could be discovered but was able to directly kill the enemies. Sending these 2 alone was the safest choice. This was why young Master Han had instructed them accordingly, while the other 3 were not given any additional tasks. However, drinking was a pastime only young Master Han enjoyed, so there was no reason for the other three to sit around doing nothing. "I'll go take a walk, too," Brother Assist said. "Perhaps I can discover something." "Me, too." War Without Wounds also got up. Young Master Han did not object, but when he saw Royal God Call looking as if he were about to stand as well, he patted him and said, "The fog is heavy, don't go running around." Royal God Call looked dejected. Gu Fei sprinted out of the tavern and immediately asked a passerby about the location of a tavern. That man looked strangely at Gu Fei before pointing toward the building right behind him. He quickly told the man about his desire to know the location of all the taverns in the city, which resulted into him being given the coordinates for all 11 taverns in Xiaoyu City. Out of these 11, 6 were system operated and 5 were player owned. Gu Fei made sure to ask this man for this detail, since it was in his experience that players tend to patronize the player owned establishments when looking to gather around for a drink or two with friends. Players seemed to enjoy the layout of these taverns, and the transactions had a very human touch to it. From time to time, promotions, such as buy 6, get 1 free would be held, which players loved. Gu Fei marked one of these and was about to make his way over, when he heard someone call out from behind him. He turned and found Royal God Call standing there. The latter might not dare run about due to the heavy fog, but he would rather risk dying in this fog than stay and accompany young Master Han drinking. Fortunately, when he stepped out of the tavern, Gu Fei was still there, inquiring after the route, so he decided to join him and hurriedly called out to him. Thus, the two men made their way to the nearest player-owned tavern. After making sure that it was the correct establishment, Gu Fei drew out his weapon and stepped through grandly. As long as he found Southern Lone Blade, combat would commence. Was there even a need to exchange words? This tavern was a lot smaller than the system-operated taverns or even Yunjuan City's raised bar, but the atmosphere within was great as a boisterous crowd was present, and the barkeeper by the counter chatting up a storm with some regular patrons. Gu Fei carefully scanned through the crowd twice but failed to find any traces of Southern Lone Blade. Despite the small size, the amenities and products it offered was all there. A hallway that led to small rooms was right next to the owner. Seeing that no one was in the main hall, Gu Fei strode over toward the rooms. There was a total of 4 rooms. A heavy cloth acted as doors for each, similar to what was found at Ray's bar. Gu Fei did not really think much as he pulled the curtain aside, revealing a man and a woman whispering sweet nothings to each other. The couple raised their heads in panic when they sensed someone pull the curtain, but it was Gu Fei who was more panicked than the two, hurriedly apologizing before pulling the curtain back. "What's the matter?" Royal God Call was behind Gu Fei and did not see the scene behind the curtain. He only saw Gu Fei show an anxious expression he had never seen before. In a moment of curiosity, he moved to pull the curtain aside, but his hand was slapped away by Gu Fei. "It's real busy in there." "What with?" "It's a man and a woman," Gu Fei informed. Whoa! This only made him want to pull the curtain aside even more, but he decided against it upon seeing Gu Fei's glare. For the second room, Gu Fei did not dare to mess around any longer, so he knocked upon the boards. "What's that sound?" Hearing someone inside call out, Gu Fei pulled the curtain aside and saw 4 players inside gambling with a deck of cards that they had made themselves. Gold coins piled upon the table within. "Sorry for the intrusion, we've got the wrong room." He quickly backed out. Gu Fei knocked on the 3rd room as well but heard nothing in response. He knocked again yet heard nothing still. Could it be empty? Thinking of this, he pulled the curtain aside. It revealed a lady with a frigid expression and giving off the vibe of a beautiful ice queen. He blankly stared at this lady, for the black robe she was wearing was very similar to his. The lady did not say a word despite several seconds passing and merely stared at him silently before Gu Fei came back to his senses. Giving the same apology and excuse like before, he let the curtain fall back in place. Royal God Call was clutching him excitedly. "She's a real babe." Gu Fei ignored him and made his way over to the final room. He casually knocked before reaching out for the curtains, only to be stunned. "Why are you guys here?" Royal God Call peeked from behind Gu Fei and instantly leapt up. "Fuck, why are you here?" Behind room 4 was the 3-man team of Drifting, Left Hand of Love, and Right Hand of Cool. They had gone their separate ways after completing Traversing 4C's guild quest, apparently even quitting the Black Hand mercenary group. Everybody reckoned that the three would be wandering once more and were probably never returning to Yunjuan City, so they had not expected to chance upon them here now. "Why are you guys here?" Drifting was far more shocked than Gufei to find the two here. After all, he was used to wandering from city to city, but young Master's elite was a bunch of mercenaries that stuck to their home turf. It made far more sense for Gufei and the others to be somewhere in Yunjuan City at this moment. "It's a long story. What are you guys doing here?" Gufei asked. "Well, we'll have to start from our gaming philosophy to answer that question," Drifting replied. Royal God Call spat, "Stop acting all deep." And then sneered, "Come out and have a duel with me if you have the guts." "I'd rather not." Drifting chuckled. "The fog here is really heavy, I'm afraid I can't find my way back once I leave. I think it's safer to just hole up in this tavern, instead." Chapter 427, The Blind Gufei. Royal God Call was inflamed that his lack of sense of direction had become the source of ridicule of his most hated rival, Drifting. He continued to squawk about having a death match with a man, but no one naturally bothered to humor him. Gufei nodded toward Drifting. "We're in the middle of something, so we'll take our leave first." Royal God Call was still yelling at Drifting even when Gufei let go of the curtain and separated him from the man. "Let's leave," Gufei said. Unexpectedly, he heard a curtain being parted from behind him. Drifting took the initiative to approach them this time, asking, "Is there a matter you need help with?" "We don't need your help. An idiot like you will only make a mess of things." Royal God Call yelled. "Are you free?" Gufei asked. "We're really bored," Drifting stated, "but we don't wish to grind in this accursed region, either. You're probably afraid you can't find your way home in this heavy fog." "Ha ha 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 ha." To dare ridicule someone of being cardinally challenged when he was one himself, Royal God Call was truly thick-skinned. Drifting shot him a look before continuing his conversation with Gufei. "We were originally planning to randomly look around for a quest or mission to take on, but we figured you guys are involved in something more interesting." "It's nothing, really. We're only on the hunt for Southern Lone Blade." "Have you seen him?" Gufei asked. "Nope." "Is he here, too?" Drifting asked back. "We're not sure ourselves, but wherever it is, do hit me up if you see him," Gufei said. Gufei naturally needed no help when it came to slaying others. He just had to know his target's location, so all the help he needed was in the searching. This was a rather boring request to Drifting, but he could only nod. "Will do." Bidding each other goodbye, Drifting returned to that room. Royal God Call grumbled and disgruntledly muttered yet still followed Gufei out of the tavern. Who would have guessed that, the moment they stepped out of the establishment, they would bore witness to a scene of PvP. It was a man against a woman, a warrior versus a mage. The two were astonished by what they were seeing, since the woman was actually that beautiful Ice Queen they had seen from the third room in the tavern, and the male opponent was actually War Without Wounds. Both parties clashed. The lady's magic staff swiped outward with a blue afterglow, looking as cold as her countenance. War Without Wounds proudly held his claymore upright with just one hand. He was an expert in every sense of the word, after all. However, even though the claymore was in his hand, the expert did not make a move to strike. That was because he was frozen there like the idiot he was. This was when Gufei and Royal God Call realized that what they were actually seeing was the end of the PvP battle. War Without Wounds was not actually completely frozen, but his actions were extremely sluggish when compared to that lady who was already done with chanting her spell and was now raising her staff to cast it. Death was all that awaited him. While he was agonizing over this fact, he spied Gufei and Royal God Call walking out of the tavern, and his frown instantly turned upside down. "Quickly save me." The message this expert sent over was quick. The lady's Arctic whirlwind had been unleashed and was on its unerring path toward War Without Wounds. It was already impossible to interrupt the spell at this point. Gufei had no choice but to blink right in front of War Without Wounds and swing out with a twin incineration. The two spells collided, and the verdict favored the one with a higher damage output, which was Gufei in this case, dissipating that Arctic whirlwind in one smooth stroke. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Royal God Call was counting. The mage in his bones was already calculating the duration of War Without Wound's frozen state. War Without Wounds finally regained control of his body once he reached number 5. The lady's eyes shows the slightest glimmer of surprise when she witnessed Gufei suddenly blink over and dissipate her Arctic whirlwind in a single move. Yet she remained quiet as she coldly regarded the 3 players before her. Gufei was in an awkward spot. While War Without Wounds could be considered as an apex expert in MMOs, he was not really the arrogant sort. Ever since their first meeting, Gufei had pegged him as a calm and collected person. It was only after that incident with Amethyst Rebirth that War Without Wounds finally revealed his real nature to Gufei, so if this person had run into any trouble, he believed it was likely due to this nature of his. Seeing that they were in a foreign city with an unfamiliar lady, Gufei surmised that he had probably tried to strike up a conversation with the pretty lady and ended up being harshly rebuffed, resulting in the two fighting with each other like this. He was also certain that it was the lady who had made the first move. War Without Wounds must have said something that had provoked this lady's anger, so Gufei did not feel great springing forth to the rescue of his fellow mercenary like this. Thus, Gufei did not say another word, only turning around to pat War Without Wounds and saying, "Let's leave." He figured that the best way to settle this matter was to vaguely sweep this matter under the rug. He did not expect, however, to sense a surge of killing intent from behind him, which caused his heart to tremble. The moment he spun around, he swiftly turned his body sideways and slashed out in retaliation. The sword hit nothing but air, but the enemy was revealed by evading that slash. It was actually another lady who looked a tad younger. This woman pirouetted and circled around to Gufei's back once more, wishing to continue her attack on him. It was as if Gufei had eyes on his back, as his sword had already swung out to block this attack without him turning around. His body followed thereafter to face the enemy. Yet all he saw was that lass thrusting out her left hand at him. Gufei had no idea if this move was intentional. All he saw was a hand shooting out toward his head, so he shifted his head to the side to dodge it. In the end, he was greeted with a cloud of green powder that scattered in the air, and in the next instant, he could see nothing but darkness. Gufei had never encountered such an occurrence in all his pking, so he was slightly flustered by this. Nonetheless, he could still determine where his enemy's attack would come from based on the sound of movement in the air, so he raised his sword out to block the attack once he determined where it was coming from. The sound of metal on metal reverberated as he deflected the enemy's dagger strike. Gufei was unable to see anything, so he could not see the look of shock on her face. All he knew was that he was currently blinded and believed he had succumbed to a sort of skill of the enemy. He was definitely at a disadvantage in his current state. While he was able to determine where to block and defend in close combat through the sound in the air, he had actually forgotten which direction the mage was at, so he was unable to use sound to determine where the mage's attack would come from. Thinking of this, Gufei hurried to retreat to the side, intending to let War Without Wounds and Royal God Call fend for themselves for a while. Since this was a skill effect, there would surely be a skill duration to it. Gufei was indeed not too far off from his supposition, for the enemy mage had unleashed a descending wheel of flames on their heads, and War Without Wounds was also in the process of avoiding it by retreating to the side. However, Gufei was as blind as a bat right now, so while his decision to retreat was the right one, he had chosen the wrong direction to dodge too. Everybody saw as he ran directly in one direction, slamming himself right into a wall in no more than 2 steps. Royal God Call was dumbfounded. He totally could not tell that Gufei was in a current state of blindness, so he merely watched him dash toward the wall, thinking that he was planning to execute some weird technique. In the end, he saw him smack right into the wall without slowing down in the least. Ha 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 ha. Clear peals of laughter could be heard from within this heated battle. Considering the cold expression that the enemy mage had held all this while, Gufei would never have guessed that this laughter belonged to that lady. This was when he reckoned that Royal God Call and War Without Wounds could not tell that he was currently blind, so he quickly yelled out to the two, "I can't see a thing." A shrill whistle was heard the moment he finished yelling this, and Gufei knew that Royal God Call had acted. However, this move the latter had made actually caused Gufei to cry out to himself in dismay. Royal God Call's damage output with his bow was extremely high, so the sound he created from his attacks was very grand. The arrows he fired off were like the piercing titter of a bird, and while that was normally not too big of a deal, since Gufei could currently only depend on his ears, that rascal's attack actually messed things up for him. Gufei could sense killing intent closing in on him at high speed and identified it as belonging to the last rushing toward him once again. However, this was the extent that killing intent could aid him. A thief was a job class that focused on stealth, so the sound of their attacks was already faint, thanks to Royal God Call's shots messing things up for Gufei. All he could hear now was the whistling sound of the arrows in flight. He was left with no other choice but to escape. He reached one hand out to feel at the wall in front of him, turning to run off. Having been slaying people for such a long time in Parallel World, this was the first time he was struggling so much. Gufei did not know whether he should laugh or cry now that he had become a joke for slamming himself straight into a wall. Even though Gufei was quick, no one was able to run at their top movement speed when they had their eyes shut, much less since the enemy was a thief. All he wanted was to buy some time, and he believed that War Without Wounds was not yet a dead man, so why would he not help him now? War Without Wounds was indeed not a dead man. As Gufei took several steps, he could hear sad moaning from behind him. "Fuck me, I got blinded as well." The next thing he heard the sound of howling wind stirring, which Gufei identified to be the sound made by War Without Wounds when he activated his skill Cyclone. He was absolutely correct, but the skill only served to create more noise, which meant that Gufei could no longer hope to play the sound game. Thus, Gufei came to a halt and quickly pivoted. He stooped and lowered his center of gravity, pointing his left shoulder forward as his right hand held his sword slightly behind. The 17th form of all-directional night combat. Just going by the name alone, this was a form usable when the poor vision at night made it impossible for the user to discern where the enemies were situated. However, it was important to note that this was a form used in situations where there was poor vision, so the user must at least be able to make out the outline of the enemies. Furthermore, if it was a battle in the dark of the night, either party would be equally affected by the limited vision. It would never be like the situation right now, where Gufei was totally blind while the enemy still had all her visual faculty. However, Gufei did not have any other solution besides this, so he could only reluctantly make do with it. When the lass saw Gufei take up that pose and giggled. "What are you doing that for?" She came around behind Gufei after saying that, which was the usual position a thief would take up when in combat. Deep in his heart, Gufei was actually delighted at this movement she had made. Just as he sensed that the enemy had finished positioning herself and was rushing toward him, he heard Royal God Call cry out, "Miles, behind you." The lass stopped and changed her position again when she heard this, leaving Gufei incensed as he bellowed on the mercenary channel, "What are you shouting for?" "Shut up." Royal God Call had only warned Gufei out of the kindness of his heart. How was he supposed to know that Gufei had actually purposely acted as if he were unaware of this? The 17th form of all-directional night combat was, in fact, a very sinister technique. The form would adopt a defensive stance to the front while maintaining an attacking posture behind. During a fight that used the cover of darkness, the enemy would naturally attempt an ambush attack from behind after rounding to the back, unaware that the true direction of the user's attack would be prepped for the rear, reeling in the enemy in a way that allowed the user to deal severe damage with just one move. Just when Gufei felt that the lass had fallen for his ruse, Royal God Call unexpectedly lent him a hand voluntarily. This made the lass change her position again, as she believed that Gufei would turn around in time thanks to Royal God Call's hint. All Gufei could do now was to really turn around, providing the lady with another opportunity to reposition herself behind his back, while he worried about Royal God Call shouting out a warning again. There was actually no need to go through all this trouble against a blinded opponent, but it just so happened that the damage output of the skills a thief could dish out would significantly increase when executed from behind the enemy. Skills like backstab were all the more limited and only allowed the user to execute them from behind their opponent. "Here she comes," Gufei muttered to himself, even as he felt the rising killing intent from behind. Chapter 428, The Mage Slayer's Gufei was only able to approximately sense an incoming attack through killing intent. There was no way for him to confidently judge the distance of the attack, but he no longer cared about this fact and just swiped his sword while pivoting the moment he felt the enemy's presence behind him. The sword struck thin air, and he had no idea if he had attacked too early or too late. Nevertheless, he was not flustered by this and just quickly followed it up with another slash. The 17th form of all-directional night combat was supposed to be a technique that allowed the user to continuously attack with a single opening. Its focus was to determine the opponent's position after the first move and to continue raining blows resolutely until the opponent was killed, never giving the opponent a chance to retaliate. Gu Fei's first strike had struck air, and the second slash he did after taking a step forward still failed to land. At this point, he had already ascertained that it was not an issue of distance, but rather that his slash was crooked. Should he adjust it to the right or left? Then, he was annoyed at this moment. Damn! In such a crucial moment like this when I need help, that rascal Royal Godcall chose to remain silent, instead. Who would have thought that, as he was wondering if he should strike left or right, he would hear tinkling laughter right before him. It turned out that the lass could not hold back her laughter when she saw Gu Fei blindly slash the air twice. While he had trouble judging the sound of fists, kicks, or weapons as they traveled through air, he would never make a wrong judgment when it came to something as crisp and clear as a person's laughter. The third slash he delivered was appropriately adjusted with this new information. The lass was still laughing when the sword appeared right before her eyes, abruptly ending her laughter. She had been literally silenced by the sword, since that slash Gu Fei had done actually swiped past her mouth. It could not be helped, though, for the mouth was the very place where the sound originated. Gu Fei's accuracy was just that deadly, and given how dangerous his current predicament had been, he had no reason to put too much thought into things. This one sword stroke had scared the lass to the point of freezing in place. Gu Fei did not know the effect his move had created and only felt that his blow had connected with something. Retracting his hand, he continued with the fourth, fifth, sixth blow. The 17th form of all-directional night combat began its display in earnest. Even if the lass were not petrified, his relentless attack would completely lock her down and make it difficult for her to defend or evade the blows. The sword glowed as it flashed with fire and electricity from time to time. Gu Fei was still blinded, so he could not execute each move perfectly. Despite this, executing each move in the 17th form of all-directional night combat was more than enough to kill the lass. The mage watched everything unfold anxiously. She wanted to lend a hand, yet a royal god call was able to harass and disrupt her every attempt with his job class advantage, so she had no choice but to grind her teeth helplessly. Actually, if it were not for the fact that she was a babe, royal god call would not have gone easy on her. He could have easily finished her off, given his prowess and the additional suppression inherent to his job class. Gu Fei suddenly stopped wailing on the thief just as she was about to die from his attacks. He happened to recover his sight during this time without even going through any transitional phase, and when he saw that the lass's pale face from fright, he no longer felt like dealing the killing blow and decisively stopped his attack. Still, Gu Fei had been the recipient of that strange skill once and did not wish to take any chances. Thus, even though he had stopped his attack, his sword remained pointing by her shoulder. Don't make any sudden move. The lass did not even dare squeak. Gu Fei looked backward and saw that War Without Wounds Cyclone had ended and was waving his claymore wildly around him even though nobody was actually attacking him. Over on the other side, Royal Godcall and that beautiful Ice Queen were still entangled in combat. Gu Fei could tell with a quick glance that it was no longer a match between the two and the former was simply toying with the latter. Seeing how elated and carefree Royal Godcall looked, Gu Fei could only sigh to himself. It will truly be a waste of your talent if Forever in Flowers doesn't accept you within their ranks. Everyone, stop. Otherwise, I'm just gonna insta-kill her. Gu Fei finally shouted. Threatening with a human hostage might not be an honorable act in itself, but the current situation had the thief under his thumb, while Royal Godcall had no problem taking down the mage. Taking a hostage would really just be his way of giving the ladies a way out without having to die. Sure enough, when the female mage heard his shout and saw how the lass was at his mercy, a concerned expression flashed across her face, and she immediately stopped her attacks. Royal Godcall beamed as he ran over to Gu Fei's side. Hee, you're so despicable to resolve this matter like this. Gu Fei ignored him. Seeing that the enemy had stopped attacking, He removed his sword from that lass's shoulder. This is nothing but a misunderstanding. There's no need to kill anyone over it. Let's just leave this matter as is. That lass returned to her senses at this point, and when she saw Gufei retract his sword, she activated her fleet foot, dashed over to the female mage's side, and tugged at her sleeve. Sis, quickly insta-kill them. Wow, they are sisters. No wonder they look so alike, Royal God Call happily quipped. To think he would still be focusing on such things. Gufei really wished to give this rascal a slap. Still, that lass doesn't seem to realize the position she's in. Thinking of this, he raised his sword and chanted out a thunderbolt. A blue flash, and a bolt of lightning came crashing down before the lass. Her face immediately paled, looking exactly as frightened as how she had looked moments ago. Don't you argue with me. Another word out of you and I'll insta-kill you. To prevent the lass from provoking another incident, he had no choice but to intimidate her for a bit. You're trying to scare me. The tone of her voice might have changed, but the words she spoke were still as obstinate. However, the female mage was well aware that Gufei was not merely intimidating her. To be capable of dispersing her Arctic whirlwind with one twin incineration, this just proved that his damage output was high, and that thunderbolt spell he had cast could very well insta-kill her sister. In short, his words were no idle threat. Zizu, that's enough. The female mage, who had been silent all this while, finally spoke, taking out a bun from her pocket and giving it to the lass. The thief did not say another word. She accepted the bun and began munching on it as she glared at Gufei from time to time. Haha, that's much better. Gufei was not in the least bit courteous. Taking out an apple to eat, he and Royal God Call appreciated the sight of war without wounds blindly cleaving away. He was most likely too focused on what he was doing, so he did not realize that the battle had already ended and that they were all just chatting now. However, after a short while, he regained his vision, and when he saw everyone just standing there, he hurriedly stopped his wild slashing motion. Lightly coughing, he struck a dignified pose like a grand monk as he held a taciturn and stern expression. Gufei really wished he could just give him a tight slap as well. Are you the video mage? Unexpectedly, the person to break the silence was the icy female mage, and the first thing she mentioned was recognizing Gufei's identity. Yes, that's me. Gufei nodded. 1,000 miles drunk? She asked again. Gufei was surprised. He did not expect for this woman to have even uncovered this information. While this was no longer a secret to those players in Yunjuan City, it was unsurprising for this information to travel out of the city. It was just that this was the first time a stranger had identified him so thoroughly, which gave him quite the shock. Are you fugitive 27,149 from before? This woman was just full of surprises with every single statement she made. While it was not odd for anyone to link the video mage with 1,000 miles drunk, not many was able to piece his identity with fugitive 27,149. Have you done research on me? He was astonished. The lady nodded. I have my eye on you early on. He immediately thought of something. Are you Cyrus? The lady nodded. After that first incident, the many instances that Gufei had gotten himself often became a hot topic on the forums, so anyone had the intention to link all those matters together in their research, they were likely to come to the conclusion that the player involved in all those incidents was the same person. Sorry you had to go through so much hassle for it. Gufei barked out a dry laugh. War without wounds and Royal God Call were thoroughly dissatisfied. They felt as if their limelight were being stolen by Gufei in front of this babe. Royal God Call was depressed. I've used my keen archery skills to suppress her for so long earlier, so why isn't she sparing me even a single glance? There was no need to mention war without wounds. He got frozen like an idiot before he could wield his 7-foot-long claymore, and it was just difficult for him just to stand there as if nothing had happened. In fact, there was still a secret he had kept within him. When they were clashing earlier, he had graciously used only one hand to hold his sword out to go easy on the lady, but in the end, he only ended up embarrassing himself by giving the lady an unnecessary handicap. He was still sighing in his heart even as his face remained casual about the matter. He. It's a pleasure to finally meet you. Gufei showed great etiquette by extending a very polite greeting to Cyrus before turning to address his fellow mercenaries. Shall we leave, then? Leave? Where to? The two asked in unison, nonplussed. A straightforward meeting isn't better than a chance encounter. We even got to know each other better after exchanging a few blows, so why don't we head into the tavern and share a drink or two? War Without Wounds mused like a poet. Oh, yes, that's more like it. Miles, you're so ungentlemanly, Royal God called derided at Gouffet. Gouffet was speechless. In the end, it was the lady who had a good eye on the matter. Oh, since you men are busy with something else, we'll take our leave now. May we have the good fortune of meeting again. Zizou, let's go. Busy? What business do we have? No, we've got nothing on. Isn't that right, Miles? War Without Wounds hurriedly grabbed a hold of Gouffet's shoulders, making intense eye contact with him, even as Royal God Call helped by adding, "That's right, we've got nothing on. Why don't we all share a round together?" Slyras gazed at the three men and said, "Actually, if you truly have a business to attend to, it is fine to share it with me. Perhaps, I can even be of help." "Is that so? Then, have you seen a player that goes by the name of Southern Lone Blade? If you've seen him, do tell us." "I'm currently looking to slay that man." War Without Wounds' hand continued to hold Gouffet in place even as he coolly flurried his claymore with his free hand. "Southern Lone Blade? I just met up with a man in the tavern," Slyras replied. "What?" The three were shocked by this revelation. They had not expected for her to really be of help. By now, it was clear who was pretending and who had a vested interest in the matter, as War Without Wounds remained stunned while Gouffet hastily asked, "Then, where is that man now?" "I'm not too sure about that," Slyras answered. "Are you friends with that guy?" Gouffet asked. "Nope." Slyras's answer was curt. "Then, you guys are." Gouffet could not think of their possible relationship. "Just a little business connection." "I'm not afraid to admit this to you, I want to know what kind of equipment the video mage has on him, so I hired Southern Lone Blade to try and loot your gear." Slyras maintained her gaze on Gouffet after saying this. Gouffet, meanwhile, looked around before facing his fellow mercenaries. "Southern Lone Blade is after my equipment? Why don't I know this?" "Yeah, weren't you the one hunting him all this while?" The two are equally confused. Chapter 429, a name card of stats and traits. Southern Lone Blade wanted to rob Gouffet, but it always ended up being stuck in the stage of conceptualization. He tried his best to make it come true, but he never found the chance to do so. In fact, he did not even get the chance to reveal his intention. After suffering a total defeat in Lori City, he eagerly returned to Lin Shui City and made careful preparations for their next attack on Gouffet, only for their target to directly come and slay him after they disembarked from the ship. Thereafter, they became the targets for the city-wide manhunt. They were in so much trouble they had no choice but to leave their origin city. How pitiful was that? Under such a scenario, who would even guess that Southern Lone Blade was harboring such thoughts? Thus, this new information that Slyras had provided them truly caught Gouffet, Royal God Call, and War Without Wounds by surprise. Does Southern Lone Blade really have that much ambition? Is this for real? Royal God Call muttered immediately. With that, the three men turned to look at Slyras. What was the point of admitting to this matter by her volition? They simply could not understand her reason for doing so. Gouffet was still the most straightforward and directly asked, "What's the reason for telling us all this so suddenly? Are you asking for trouble?" He then gripped his sword more tightly. If Slyras was requesting for him to slay her on the spot, he would gladly oblige. Slyras returned his gaze. "It seems that you guys are hunting for Southern Lone Blade. I wanted you to know that I'm the one who hired him to do it, so if you have issue with him because of that, you can directly come at me rather than trouble the man." "Oh." The three hummed in acknowledgement. Gouffet nodded his head. "Lady, I greatly admire your spirit and willingness to bear the consequence of your action, but you are mistaken. I only learned about that man's intention to loot my equipment from you right now. I am hunting him for a different reason, but since you've been so forthright with me, I shall extend to you the same courtesy. The truth is that I am also employed by someone to slay him, but I feel regretful after hearing that from you. If I knew that he is after me as well, I would not work so hard to locate the man and would just randomly choose a spot for him to seek me himself." He heaved a deep sigh of regret once he was done saying this. Gouffet's words left Slyras feeling stunned. This was when he thought of something and said, "Oh, yeah, since you're his employer, I wonder if you can perhaps tell him where I'm located right now and get him to quickly come after me?" Looking at his sincere expression, Cyrus's icy countenance melted into boundless curiosity. She had no idea how to answer this request of his and eventually replied, "I don't think I can help you with that. The man has just informed me a while ago of his decision not to complete my request, even going as far as to return my deposit along with the penalty fee for the cancellation." "And you just agreed? How could you indulge him like that? It's far too unprofessional of him to call it quits as and when he wishes." Gouffet was peeved. Cyrus was once more put on the spot. Even the lass that had been munching on the bun was stunned by this strange man's seemingly rigid mindset. "So, do you have any idea where he went?" Left with no other choice, this was his only question at the moment. "Nope." Cyrus shook her head. He heaved a heavy sigh once more. "What do we do now?" Royal Godcall asked. "Since we can't find Southern Lone Blade at the moment anyway, why don't we all sit down and share a drink or two?" War Without Wounds once more raised this suggestion. "That's a great idea, I support this." Royal Godcall happily nodded in agreement. "Oh, yeah," Gouffet suddenly said. "Whoa," Miles agreed as well. "All right, ladies, let's all go in and have a drink." The two men were extremely excited. "That's enough out of you two." Gouffet was done with antics. The two of them stared at him in bewilderment, scratching their heads. Gouffet continued to address Cyrus, "Since you hired him before, you should know of the method to contact him, right? Do you mind telling me how you go about doing it?" Cyrus was not foolish, either. Hearing his question, she instantly made the connection. "Are you thinking of luring the man out?" Gouffet nodded. Cyrus promptly replied, "I can't help you with that." "Why not?" "This is an agreement between the two of us. Just as how they will never reveal their employer's information, as their employer, I won't betray the method in which they can be contacted as well. Plus, I think they've already foreseen the method you're trying to attempt right now," she explained. "This agreement of yours sounds like a gag order of mutual coercion," he said. "That may be so. While I didn't explicitly tell them to keep my identity a secret, I should still uphold my end of the bargain," she said. Gouffet nodded. It turned out that this was a lady of principle. Everybody would stand firm when it came to their principle, and any attempts to criticize or even admonish their stance would merely be a fool's errand. Gouffet had no wish to be that sort of fool, so he could only sigh. "Since that is your wish, I guess that's all there is to this matter." "That's all there is." "Awesome. Let's all go and have a drink." War Without Wounds and Royal Godcall cheered. "You can all do what you wish, I'll continue to stroll about," Gouffet said. "Oh, well, good luck with that." The two men's eyes were not even looking at him at this point. They could hardly wait for him to leave, either, otherwise, the ladies would not even look their way. Their only concern was if the ladies decided to reject their invitation. "Hold it!" Cyrus abruptly shouted. Gouffet turned his head to face her. "I am curious. Regarding me employing them to loot your equipment, you..." Cyrus of course found this strange. Anyone would find this to be perplexing. In such a situation, even if it had not resulted in a duel of life and death, the target would at least not have acted so aloof and unconcerned toward the issue like how Gouffet was acting right now. "Oh, that's what you mean." Gouffet turned around fully this time, but his answer once more left Cyrus baffled. "I am extremely grateful that you spend money on hiring someone to try and hunt me down. Next time, I hope you won't find someone as unprofessional as Southern Lone Blade. Do find someone who will have more backbone and possess a relentless fighting spirit. Thanks a lot." You. Cyrus was absolutely stumped right now. Gouffet turned around to resume his stroll before suddenly turning back. "Oh, yeah. Do you still wish to see my equipment? Here it comes." Cyrus thought with shock. So, in the end, he still wishes to seek revenge on me. She mentally prepared herself to dodge his incoming spell. In the end, all she saw was him fishing out a booklet and quill from his dimensional pocket. With moonlit nightfalls wedged under his armpit, he jotted down something on the booklet. While they were all wondering what he could be writing, he stopped scratching with his quill, proceeded to tear out that piece of paper, and then lifted it over to Cyrus, as if it were a name card. "That's the stats for my equipment. Take it and slowly admire it, I guess." Cyrus's brain went blank. Unconsciously receiving the paper from him, She brought it to her eye level. The stats and traits he had written on the piece of paper would indeed elicit a scream from any player, but her thoughts were in turmoil right now, so nothing she saw really registered in her mind. "I'm leaving now," Gufei bade War Without Wounds and Royal God Call farewell before throwing in a reminder, "Take good care of Royal, don't lose him." "Ah, just leave already." Royal God Call shooed Gufei away. To actually say such a thing in front of these babes, his image would really be ruined. Gufei turned and left, disappearing into the fog in no time. Slyras was still clutching the paper with a stunned look. It was, instead, the lass, who had slid right up to her, that exclaimed after taking a peek at the piece of paper, "Wow, that's amazing." "He's probably bluffing, right?" Slyras seemed to have been jolted out of a dream by her remark. Taking a proper look at the numbers listed on the paper, she was naturally amazed. Forget about the high spell damage of Moonlit Nightfalls, just the additional traits of the sword left her feeling dazed. What was the most eye-catching was Midnight Spirit Robe's trait, which was the very same trait Gufei could not make sense of in the beginning, and what Royal God Call was unable to fully understand regarding Spell Mastery +1. It was not exactly uncommon to find equipment with trait that increased Spell Mastery nowadays, but most would only increase it by a certain percentage. After an extensive research by a majority of mages out there, it was discovered that this particular trait not only increased spell aptitude but also improved all types of proficiency of a spell in the mage's arsenal. The higher the proficiency a spell had, the more effective it was when cast, and the spell mastery trait's purpose was to strengthen proficiency and increase a player's spell power. One could say that its effect fully represented what it meant to have true spell mastery. With how spell proficiency would increase alongside with continuous spell usage and the lack of an official statement about it having an upper limit, anybody could just imagine how powerful spell mastery would become as a mage's proficiency increased. Thus, spell mastery had become a top-tier trait that all mages yearned for. As for Gufei's +1, it was indeed exactly as how Royal God Call had surmised back then. This +1 was actually 100%. This meant that if Gufei had a spell proficiency of 2000 in Twin Incineration, he could dish out the power of a 4000 proficiency Twin Incineration the moment he wore his Midnight Spirit Robe. Although doubling the rate of proficiency of a spell or skill did not directly translate into doubling the damage output, the huge increase was, nevertheless, frightening. Slyras had no idea if there could be items in Parallel World that would increase spell mastery by a crazy amount of +2 or even +3, but she was positive +1 was the highest she had seen currently, and the fact that the item possessed such high value in this top-tier trait meant that Midnight Spirit Robe was more than enough to be worn by Gufei for his entire gaming life in Parallel World. "Sis, is this for real?" the lass asked after reading all the traits listed on the paper. "Ladies, I assure you that it is all true." It was unknown when Royal God Call had made his way over to stand beside the two women. He had personally seen Gufei's equipment with his eyes, and it was indeed so illogical he was naturally unable to forget about it. Casually skimming through the paper, he knew that it was not even off by a point. More importantly, he finally found his chance to speak to these two ladies. "Come on, let's head in and talk about this over a drink or two." War Without Wounds was a veteran when it came to grasping a chance as well. At this moment, Gufei was on his way to the next tavern. Southern Lone Blade having a client like Slyras in the previous tavern meant that he might have another one out there. Perhaps, they had chosen to come to this city because they had matters to settle here. That was what Gufei thought even as he used the mercenary channel to inform the others about his recent serendipitous encounter, making a point to suggest his thought of luring Southern Lone Blade out by hiring him to do a job. Such a matter would obviously be in Brother Assist's wheelhouse, as only this information expert could carry out a task of this nature. He agreed, but his understanding of Southern Lone Blade as a person led him to believe that it was unlikely for the latter not to have thought of such a potential entrapment. It would not hurt to try, though. So Brother Assist still dove into his friends list and connections to find out more. Chapter 430, Life's Good. Gufei had finally finished visiting all the 11 taverns in Xiaoyu City. Since these taverns were spread out across the different districts in the city, if he were to add up the total distance he had traveled, he had more or less covered the entire city. Unfortunately, whether it was system operated or player owned, the tavern's main hall or side room, he never did spot any traces of Southern Lone Blade and his crew. He learned nothing new from the inquiries he made to those players he met, either, as not one of them seemed to have come across a squad with that particular job class composition. Sword Demon reported in as well. He had walked to all the major spawn points of the 7 job classes, even asking players from time to time, but he did not find out anything useful. All we can depend on now is brother assist, was the thought that crossed his mind when Goofy stepped out of the last tavern. There was a building opposite of this establishment that was particularly familiar and inviting, and it was of course the bounty assignment hall for Xiao City. He happened to still have the park points he had earned from helping Southern Lone Blade Squad escape at Linshui City, so he decided to cleanse his park value while it was convenient. He optimistically thought, I might even bump into that guy in the process of clearing my park points. At this time, in the very first tavern Goofy had first visited, Royal God Call, War Without Wounds, Slars, and her sister were all seated around a table, and they really did start to get along after having exchanged a few blows with one another. After being introduced to each other, Yenziazu turned out to be that thief from the 7 bottlenecks and the actual sister of Slars, who was the newest member of the 5 unyielding experts. Having played Parallel World since its open beta days, both could be considered as veterans. However, with how the players were all assigned to random cities when their characters were first created, even if the two were sisters in reality, they were still tossed in separate parts of this VR world by the Heartless system, and it was only recently that they had been reunited. On the street before, War Without Wounds had chanced upon the 2 ladies and immediately attempted to chat them up. For this pair of sisters, be it in reality or in MMOs, they were no stranger to such attempts, so they did not think much about it and were more than prepared to just blow him off casually. In the end, it was his relentlessness to the point of saying something along the line of, "Hey, girls, do you want Uncle here to help you grind levels?" Tianziazu, which infuriated Slars and led her to attack in a bid to discipline the man. War Without Wounds was not actually that despicable and lewd. He had purposely said those words in hopes of provoking the ladies into attacking him, which would then give him a chance to show off his glorious prowess by beating them in a 1 versus 2 fight, subsequently leaving the 2 beauties a deep impression of him. Who knew what crappy novel did he learn such a method of skirt chasing from? He was not even certain if it would be useful. War Without Wounds was truly just unfortunate that the 2 ladies he attempted this on, one happened to be among the 5 unyielding experts and another was among the 7 bottlenecks. In the end, it was him who had summarily been beaten by the ladies, becoming the absolute shame of any pickup artist out there. Actually, given War Without Wounds' strength as an Apex expert, if he had taken the fight seriously, he would have had a 50% chance of emerging victorious. However, in his desire to show off his skills, he haughtily took on the 2 sisters with just one hand. Slars had earned herself a place in the 5 unyielding experts with the help of her unique spell Ice Chamber of the 9 Dragons, so it was of course easy for her to freeze War Without Wounds in place like the fool he was with the spell. Fortunately, Goofy and Royal God Call had managed to intervene in time, or he would have lost a level by the 2 sisters' hands today. Sitting together like this, the sisters were still somewhat prejudiced toward War Without Wounds, but after Royal God Call asked what had started the fight, and War Without Wounds explained his side of the matter in earnest, the 2 ladies found the entire affair to be humorous and annoying. If that was all it took for ladies to fall in love, would there still be single men out there? Yenziazu's personality was more easygoing and vivacious than her sister, Slars, and she was already making fun of War Without Wounds' terrible skirt-chasing skills. However, for War Without Wounds to have been able to employ such a method on women showed just how his shamelessness was his greatest asset. No amount of ridicule could knock him down, as the man coughed and severely addressed everyone, "Since everybody is seated together so happily, let's just forget about that fight we had." Royal God Call had more of a quick wit. The moment he heard Yenziazu make fun of War Without Wounds' technique at courting girls, he quickly pounced on the topic to ask a very impure question with an innocent look. "Oh, so, how should girls be courted?" With how young Yenziazu was, it was impossible for her to have much experience regarding such things. In fact, her ideas were equally as messed up as War Without Wounds, Influenced by those romance-y novels that focused on the relationship between men and women, adding to that specious logic and reasoning. At the moment, it was as if she were a love guru as she imparted this knowledge to the two men. And so, the three delightfully discussed this topic, while Slyris silently sat at the side, never once butting in and just listening. Even though she no longer looked as frosty and distant as before, she still had her poker face and had yet to show even the slightest smile. War Without Wounds and Royal God Call did not dare provoke her either. They were just glad that her little sister was lively enough for the two ladies. They were chatting animatedly when the curtain from the fourth room parted. Drifting and his two companions stepped out, clearly having had enough to drink, and were about to leave. War Without Wounds, who happened to be looking in that direction, immediately called out to Drifting when he spotted him. Drifting also returned his greeting, causing the Royal God Call to adopt a supercilious look. Yenziazu turned her head over at this point, and when she spotted the man, she exclaimed in delight, "Big bro Drifting." Drifting was obviously shocked to see her. "Hey, why are you here? You two know each other?" War Without Wounds was surprised. Yenziazu tugged at Slyris and said, "Big sis, this man is Drifting. He's the one I'm telling you about that helped me back at Baofeng City." Hearing this, Slyris got up and thanked Drifting for helping her sister while she shook his hand. To which, he replied, "Hey, don't mention it." It turns out Slyris is Yenziazu's big sister. Slyris nodded her head. "My little sister often mentions you. She's extremely proud to have met the #1 mage in Parallel World." "Oh, you flatter me," Drifting modestly replied in a rush, but before his eyes could even move to the others, Royal God Call's skeptical voice sounded. "The #1 mage refers to you?" "Of course, not." "Where's Miles?" Drifting asked. The connotation behind his words was clear. "It is not me, but it is not you, either." It was as if they were speaking of the devil, as the door to the tavern was pushed open at this moment and in came a black-robed mage. Vulgarly kicking a stool over, he tapped the table with his sword as he pointed to someone. "Bounty mission. Please leave if you're not involved." "Whoa, I haven't seen this in so long," Royal God Call sighed. Quite a while back, he had been a witness to many scenes like this when he followed Gufei around to earn his Windchaser's boots by completing 100 consecutive bounty mission. "Oh, yeah." Drifting could feel plenty of emotions well up inside him, for this was also the same scene he had seen when he first met Gufei. Obviously, since Gufei barely made a name for himself inside the city, such utterance drew quite a strong response from the crowd. The four seated at the table picked up their weapons in outrage and moved to take on the enemy, as the other players around them got up and gave them a wide berth. The establishment they were in did not have much space. How unreasonable would it be if the onlookers became collateral casualties all due to the spells and skills flying around willy-nilly? The onlookers hastily scrambled to the safety of the corners, curiously checking out this arrogant mage. The four players Gufei had accosted yelled belligerently, "Just what are you up to, punk?" Everybody had seen people do bounty mission, but none of them had ever witnessed someone do it so blatantly. "Bounty mission," Gufei said once more as he dove toward his target. Amid yelps, fire glowed, cyclone spun, and arrows flew. Every sort of skills was on display in that narrow space. Slyra subconsciously gripped her magic staff, ready to lend a hand if the need ever arose, yet she saw Gufei's two friends, Royal God Call and War Without Wounds, just calmly drinking their liquor and munching on their peanuts, as if nothing were happening. The mage Drifting seemed to have no intention of lending a hand, either. Folding his arms by his chest, he watched the battle unfold before him with enjoyment. Slyers could not make heads or tails of their inaction, but when she turned to look at the fight, she got it. In the time she took to look away and back again, Gufei had already subdued his bounty target. He took 2 steps in retreat and knocked on the table. "Mission accomplished. I welcome any attempts to avenge a comrade, but I strongly advise against it." 3 out of the 4 were still alive, and they were clearly shocked by his sudden blitz. Gufei was already upon them in the blink of an eye and easily evaded their attacks moments ago. His next strike easily reduced their number from 4 to 3. "Wait here if you have the guts, punk." The 3 did not dare to act trashly, stomping their way to the door before running right out of the tavern. Gufei did not block them, either. Stowing the sword back into his dimensional pocket, He walked over to Royal Godcall and the others. "You're all having a drink," he said as he casually grabbed a stool and sat down. He took a handful of peanuts and began eating them, turning his head over to Drifting. "What are you standing there for? Aren't you going to continue your bounty mission?" Royal Godcall asked. "Didn't you hear the guy tell me to wait here?" Goofy replied nonchalantly with a question, kicking Royal Godcall's leg. "Shift to the side a bit more, make some space for these guys to sit as well." Royal Godcall would make space if it were anyone else, but it was entirely another story since the person was Drifting. Drifting was not particularly bothered by this, smiling to the others as he said, "You guys can keep sitting, I have something on, so I'll be taking my leave now." "Something on? What is it? Do you need help?" Yenziazu stood up, looking keen to repay her debt. Drifting chuckled helplessly. "I am merely being polite. I actually don't have anything on right now, but I do want to leave." "Leave already, then we won't be seeing you out," Royal Godcall impatiently blurted out. "Feel free to look for me if there's anything," Drifting told Goofy. "Forget about it, it's better if you have something you need me for, instead," Goofy said. Drifting chuckled helplessly at this and then took his leave. Royal Godcall heaved a sigh of relief when he saw him leave, immediately turning cheerful. "Life's good." The conversation continued, albeit Yenziazu's attitude toward Royal Godcall had become a lot more distant. Apparently, Royal Godcall's rude treatment of Drifting did not sit well with her. Decisively taking Drifting's side, she no longer liked the archer. Royal Godcall was depressed, and his resentment toward Drifting surged once more. Goofy and Slyrus sat there without a word. Anyone who saw the two would think that they were being childish. In contrast, people would think War Without Wounds was an elder who did not know how to behave himself, if he were just a bit older. This continued for a while. Goofy had almost polished off all the peanuts War Without Wounds got. Looking at the time, he glumly said, "What's going on? That man told me to wait here, yet I don't see anyone at all. Do the players inside the city enjoy being so flippant?" With that, he poured the remaining peanuts to the palm of his hands and tapped his Windchaser's emblem. "I'm taking my leave, too." In a flash of white light, he teleported himself back to the bounty assignment hall. Slyrus and Yenziazu were dumbfounded, and War Without Wounds and Royal Godcall helplessly explained, "He's off to continue bounty hunting." Goofy handed in his completed bounty mission upon his return, followed by a white light surrounding him. He had finally reached level 41. At the same time, the system prompt sounded, as he once more obtained a special reward from doing bounty mission.